I've played far too many games like Anthem, an online RPG that only makes good on its promise of meaningful multiplayer gameplay and progression after you've labored through its long-winded and repetitive story quests. Anthem's endgame is surprisingly fun, since its already excellent combat is reinvigorated by interesting loot and challenging gameplay later on. Unfortunately, there simply isn't enough of this kind of content to make it worth the wait, and what's here is inconsistent in terms of polish, clarity, and balance. Anthem, as it stands now, is an adventure best saved for a later date. Anthem takes place on the wild frontier of Bastion, a sprawling and colorful sci-fi expanse littered with aggressive wildlife, encroaching enemy factions, and mysterious Shaper relics that end up being little more than glorified enemy spawners. You play as a freelancer, an altruistic mercenary who pilots a mech called a Javelin and subsists on the dangerous contracts divvied out by the denizens of Fort Tarsis. This cast of bohemian future folk are generally charming and well acted, at times stealing the spotlight to deliver a heartfelt monologue.
That was probably hard to say to my face, but I needed it.
I found myself emotionally invested in a few of the characters, like the prideful old warrior Halleck. With that said, my desire to engage with the cast waned after it became clear that the optional conversations were tonally out of sync with the events of the main storyline. Some characters forgot that they were supposed to be mad at me, while others were still bitter even though I'd smoothed things over in the previous expedition. Most of Anthem's dialogue delivered outside of Fort Tarsis seems to exist only to justify the story path's maddening reuse of dull quest activities like depositing shiny orbs into a pool of ferrofluid, or standing on a capture point for the 100th time.
The unstable oscillations while creating a localized prismatic vortex through your jav. Someone needs to stay close to the auspex.
Too many of the more varied and interesting elements, like game-changing masterwork weapons and worthwhile stronghold incentives, are held back for far too long. The narrative portions of the approximately 15-hour plot are delivered in lengthy, barely interactive chunks every time you're forced to return to Fort Tarsis between missions. You'll exit your Javelin, mute your voice chat, and meander around the eerily silent walled city at a snail's pace. Only during two major plot developments does consequence finally affect anything beyond the gates of Fort Tarsis, pairing unique mission gameplay with story elements in a meaningful way. But these glimpses at the BioWare of old dissipate back into your regularly scheduled tedium as quickly as they arise. Anthem's combat is initially strong, engaging, and unique, thanks in part to responsive flight controls that feel good on both controller and mouse and keyboard. You can take off and fly at will, staying aloft longer if you make use of waterfalls, skim across rivers, or take a nosedive to cool your jets. Its deft aerial maneuvering transitions seamlessly into punchy third-person shooting, accented by a suite of mostly fun-to-use abilities. And the fantasy behind each of the four Javelin archetypes is conveyed well with the help of phenomenal animation work. Piloting a shield-wielding colossus into a lowly enemy scout, for example, felt like sandwiching a balloon between a charging V8 Mustang and a brick wall. There are a lot of spectacular moments, particularly when fighting larger foes, and at times, I found myself in awe of my ability to effortlessly execute exactly what I had in mind. Of course, that adept feeling vanished in the frequent presence of bugs and imbalances, like invisible sources of damage, imprecise telegraphs, lengthy stun effects, and missing combo triggers or legendary bonuses. The combat also plays its whole hand within the span of the first few hours, and then proceeds to temporarily lose its appeal as you simply grind to increase the numbers on your already acquired gear variants and weapons. You won't see much in the way of new and interesting loot or enemies until you approach the endgame, and that's a very long drought. Rarity means nothing early on, as the extra stats are far too random and insignificant to be useful, and use annoyingly vague terminology. Weapon and ability balance is a total crapshoot. The Interceptor's cluster mine, for example, is inexplicably ineffective most of the time. At these moments you're left with the choice: attempt to finish the expedition with an apparently useless ability, or abandon it and suffer through an agonizingly long load screen to change equipment. The inability to change loadouts on the fly is thoroughly felt here, and makes experimentation more of a dangerous deterrent rather than a fun process of trial and error. The mechanical quality of Anthem's enemies is actually quite good, most of which require a unique strategy to beat efficiently, and all of them send enough projectiles your way to keep you constantly moving. But their variety in terms of pure quantity leaves a lot to be desired. you'll see the vast majority of unique enemies only hours in, with stronghold bosses and 1 or 2 Dominion baddies saved for later. The open world free play mode is fun, if a little light on variety, but the 3 strongholds are my favorite content in Anthem due to their teamwork inducing difficulty and mechanically respectable boss fights. Unfortunately, they too have their fair share of issues. The boss of the Tyrant Mine can be bested in under a minute on hard difficulty, while the final encounter in another spoiler-ridden stronghold took my party upwards of 30 minutes to defeat on normal with no wipes. I'm all for marathon boss encounters, but here the rewards didn't match the task, and while I love large bombastic telegraphs like the Ash Titan's Flame Wave, the hit detection on such abilities is frustratingly imprecise. Whether the result of unusually bad latency or some other factor, the "how did that hit me" effect only gets more punishing as you venture into the Grandmaster difficulties. And considering that's where the majority of the interesting rewards are, it's especially aggravating. Finally, there are an absolute enormity of major bugs that still need to be squashed, including the numerous crashes and disconnects that I experienced during my 40 hours in Anthem. I've encountered far more than BioWare addressed in the first patch, notably a bug where the game audio cuts out entirely until you relaunch, and the inability to rejoin a stronghold in progress after disconnecting because your spot is immediately filled. Anthem comes closer to succeeding as a co-op action RPG than it does a story-focused game, but only does so after a trying grind through its repetitive main quests. And even at that, its standout elements like the flashy combat and mechanically rich bosses still have a long way to go in terms of polish, variety, and balance. I hope that with time, BioWare can capitalize on its strengths and turn Anthem into something worth investing all these hours into. But all the indications are there's a lot of work to be done to reach that point. If you enjoyed the review, shoot me a follow on Twitter @ThugandDuggan, and for more on Anthem, check out 6 changes we want to see, everything you need to know about its microtransactions, and 10 minutes of Grandmaster endgame gameplay. And for everything else, keep it right here on IGN.